Hi everyone, how are you? This is Adam Law once again with a new video for Wanderings with Adam Law. Today's video topic is called Why the Jews in the Diaspora Got Weak. And I might change the title. I want it to stay a little more catchy, but that's what I'm using as my working title today. And we're going to explore here on why Jewish religion has become so focused on spiritual as opposed to physical power. We're going to do this through historical and Torah lens. That's why I'm going to be calling this part of a series called Torah as History, where I'm not going into every single historical detail like an academic would, but I'm using historical information based on Torah knowledge to present a interesting investigation on different Jewish subjects today, maybe controversial ones for some. So we're going to look at the history of Judaism and why the Orthodox Judaism, meaning is the Jewish philosophy, had such a difficult time adjusting over the thousands of years we were in exile to the reality of physical power, that Jews need to be tough, that Jews need to take political power and have physical might. It's very apropos that I'm taping this today on the 5th day of Hanukkah, which is a perfect example of a story where, as Jews, every Jew celebrates Hanukkah. It's beloved by the most religious and the least religious among the Jewish people, but yet we see that we celebrate in the Gemara Shabbat, as well as in all our prayers, we speak with the fact of the physical miracle that we fought a war before the spiritual miracle of the 8 lights. This first miracle was the miracle of the war that we fought, right? A miracle that happened within the real world, where real warriors fought a war. And we don't say that the war, that God intervened in this sense that God shot thunderbolts from the sky. Rather, as God gave us the might and the right to fight as individuals. And we see that tzaddikim, the people who were fighting the war, the righteous who fought the war, the Maccabees, were the most religious. There was no dichotomy between the people who fought and the people who were the most religious. And today, even the most religious celebrate the mighty fighting power of the Maccabees. So what happened? Because when you look around and you see Jewry today, particularly in the diaspora, you don't see the strong warrior type. Even among non-religious Jews, the intellectual Jew has become really the ideal Jew. And among the religious, the yeshiva bacher, the person who just sits and learns, who may be physically weak, doesn't have a lot of physical might, has become the ideal, the yeshiva bacher. Of course, when you look in Israel, you don't see this the same. You see that the Israeli Jew is certainly mighty and has a history of that. But you do still see it among the most religious in Israel who don't participate in the fightings of the war for Israel, yet they live in the state. Now, there's one disclaimer I want to make here, is that, yes, there's going to be some criticism here of different religious philosophies within this video, but I want to make sure everyone here understands what the difference between internal and external criticism is. It's very important. When COVID-19 first hit, there were certain people who were very critical of the ultra-Orthodox response, why people were not taking the medical advice seriously, and because of that, many people in the most Orthodox communities suffered and lost a lot of people. And still today, some Orthodox people aren't taking it seriously enough what's going on out there. Actually, and as a side note, I just found out I'm going to be one of the first recipients of the COVID-19 vaccine in Canada. Working here at a hospital and working with patients at a long-term home, I was selected. I was one of the people who put my name in for it. I'm going to be literally one of the first people in Canada to get the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's my philosophy on it. My general idea is that the right answer is usually the most simple answer. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, though I'm not saying some conspiracies might not have some truth to them. I don't think this whole thing's a conspiracy. Anyway, let's get back to our topic at hand here. When this thing was going on, at the beginning, there was some criticism. Then there was a certain person, Mayor Weinstein, who was criticizing the ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel for not taking COVID-19 seriously, not shutting down the synagogues, etc. And then another rabbi here, I'm not going to say his name, he lambasted Mayor for doing this, for attacking them, and said, "You're like an anti-Semite. What's the difference between you and anti-Semites?" And this is and he was trying to say it's so wrong to do this, to point this out. And I want to again point out now the difference between internal and external criticism. Internal criticism is when you're part of a community and you want that community to do better, and therefore you criticize certain parts of the community in the interest of the love and betterment of the whole community. That's very different from anti-Semitism, which is external criticism, which is viewing Jews as wrong, as bad. Example, difference to that, again, biblically would be Isaiah, Jeremiah. These prophets, they criticize the Jews for not following the Torah, for not doing justly. But they certainly part of the community, and they loved the community. That was internal criticism. That was there to make the Jews better. Whereas other religions criticize Jews for reasons for their own self-aggrandizement and to knock us down. So again, I have to disagree with the rabbi who criticized Meir on that internal criticism is always a necessary part for growth within the community. So any criticism I do here today in this video is going to be under the category of internal criticism. I consider myself part of the Orthodox community and very much want to see the improvement of all the Jewish communities in the whole world. Okay, so we look at the Hanukkah story again. We see the fact that the Jews were fighting, they were warriors. So what happened? It's an interesting thing because a lot of religious people don't really study the Tanakh. But the Jews were always, in the time of the Tanakh and the Torah, a warrior people. They had to conquer the land physically. Yes, there were miracles. Yes, those miracles were aided with Torah. But with Torah, yes, those miracles were aided with Torah and prayer. But yet, we were warriors. We were people of physical might. And when we lost, but it was always necessary to keep the Torah and have that spiritual aspect as well. And because we weren't doing things right, as the Talmud points out, the 3 cardinal sins of adultery, murder, and idol worship, we lost the first temple, and the Jews went into the Diaspora, mainly into Babylon. As the Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, came and destroyed the temple and sent us into Babylon. And you see a lot about this in Yirmiyahu, the stories there, also other prophecies, and you see this in the different books of the Tanakh, what happened there, Eicha, etc. Could you imagine how hard that first diaspora was? It was like, for the first time, we were actually completely removed from our land. True, before that, the 10 tribes had been sent into dispersion, but it seemed like there was always a remnant. But now there literally was not much of a remnant left. Could you imagine the suffering that we had going through that experience, not knowing? But we had one consolation, a prophecy from Yirmiyahu, where he said, after 70 years, we will return. And in the book of Yirmiyahu, it says there that this letter, this prophecy was sent to all the communities in the diaspora. Not to worry, we're going to go back. Maybe not us, but our children, our grandchildren, we're going to go back. And this was the time of prophecy, and everyone believed this and understood this. And we calculated everything according to this. You can see so much about what was going on in the diaspora and how we returned to build the temple for the second temple period. You can see this in the stories of Esther, Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Interesting thing there is, like the rest of the Tanakh, while those books are holy scripture and there's spiritual aspects going on there, as well there is an aspect there of politics. It was real life politics. People engaged with the kings of the time in order to, Cyrus, Darius, Ahasuerus, different kings, Nebuchadnezzar, all these different kings were involved in a political level as well. There's a spiritual aspect and a physical aspect. And when we left the land, we saw ourselves as still politically connected to the body of the land of Israel. We were in Gullus. We had the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, though I'm sure many people doubted and suffered and wondered if we were going to go back to our land, by the rivers of Babylon, for instance, the famous Tehillim. Yet, we had that prophecy. And we also see the Torah itself. There is a history of going back and forth. The Jews get sent into exile, and they go back. Sometimes in their lifetime, sometimes not. Adam, for instance, is sent into exile, but he doesn't come back. Abraham goes into exile in Mitzrayim, but comes back. Isaac never goes into exile. Yaakov goes into exile after the incident with Esav, and then he comes back into Israel. But in the end, actually, towards the end, because of the famine, he goes off to Egypt and dies in Egypt, though he has promised, don't worry, Yaakov, you will come back, but not necessarily in that lifetime. So the idea of exile and redemption is already in the Torah, already in the patriarchs, and Yirmiyahu had it there. So the time of the first temple, we see the politics going on again in these books, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and the spiritual aspect. but we saw ourselves as physically attached to the land. The land was a real place. The second temple period, both after the Babylonians came the Persians, and the Persians let us go back to our land. And there was only a small remnant. 24,000 or so Jews went back to the land. The big people, the religious people, the spiritual people, the big businessmen, they were successful in Babylon, Persia. They weren't allowed to go back. They weren't allowed to go back. Or they didn't want to go back because, like the Jews now, they were successful in the diaspora and their identity was dependent on the diaspora. They didn't want to go back. And they had all the excuses in the world. And they lived so close to the time of the exile too. I mean, they had grandfathers, maybe who were still alive, some of them, who had seen this, who had witnessed this. We know Mordechai was among the exiles. So it was a small few that went back. And eventually that community got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they built the second temple. Now the Persians were destroyed by the Greeks. That's where we get our Hanukkah story. There we fought for our independence again. And then the big guys came along, the Romans. And the Romans knocked us down, destroyed the second temple, and sent us into exile. Only this time we know we didn't have prophets anymore. At the period of the Men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, we lost prophecy. There was a tefillah that was made, that we lost the power of prophecy. As a side effect, when they prayed that we would lose our attachment to idol worship, we also lost prophecy. And the idea is, the Gemara, it says, Hacham Adif Minavi, that a rabbi is more powerful than Navi. And we got into this level of the intellectual, where prophecies, miracles, everything decreased. Ruach HaKodesh decreased. There was a bas kol, maybe like a little inkling of a message from God, and the rabbis took over, and the power of spirituality took over. And we had no prophecy when we left the second time, when the second temple was destroyed. We didn't have a Yirmiyahu. We did have all these prophecies that eventually we would get back, and all these things were talked about both in the Torah, in Parshas Pehukosai, in Kitavo, and all the prophets, but we didn't have a specific prophecy which told us when this was going to happen. We had hints, and that's why we had so many false Messiah movements throughout all the years, but we didn't know when we were going to go back. And over that time, the rabbis got more and more strong. For all these years, and all the oppression, Rome became the official, Christianity became the official religion of Rome, and they had a vested interest in knocking us down and making us suffer. We lost all political power. And Jews, over time, we didn't see ourselves as political figures anymore. We saw ourselves as spiritual figures. And all the chosenness status wasn't just as a people with physical might in the land. It was reinterpreted, re-understood as being a spiritual thing. That was always there, of course. I mean, all the way back to the patriarchs. But that became the central focus. And Torah study became the central focus. And over all these years, Israel became more and more of a symbol, more and more of an idea. It wasn't a real place anymore. It was just like this fantastical land that we could go to. And some few people did go there. Though we always have these interpretations, these things like Rashi and others who say the temple was going to fall from heaven, the redemption was just going to come from God. There's always people like the Ramban who argued and said, no, we can go back to the land. We can go and fight the wars. We still have a mitzvah to conquer the land. That hasn't ended. But they were few. And generally the whole hashkafa, the whole philosophy developed that Judaism became extremely spiritualized. So much to the point where in the later years, in Kabbalah and Hasidus, we see that the idea of exile and redemption became an idea that was really linked to our soul. It became a power of our soul. It became our soul has exile and redemption. And there's exile and redemption in God. And God's spirit, the Shekhinah, is in exile. Though this also is an idea found back in Yaakov. As we see when Yaakov goes down, God says he'll be with him. We see that God also travels with us in exile. So the idea is old, but that became the emphasis. The spiritual tikkun, the tefillah, this became the emphasis. As we lost our physical might and our physical power, we looked solely to God to help us and through our prayers. And I'm not saying this is wrong or bad. This is obviously the way God wanted it to be. But this causes a problem, right? Already back in the Renaissance period, there were Italian religious thinkers such as Ben Vargas who pointed this out, that the Jews, in a way, we kind of lost something, that already back in the Second Temple period, that internal divisions among the Jewish people, talks about this in the Talmud too, were caused a lot of the problems. And that the Jews need to also be a people of physical might. Though these were interesting philosophies, they were, again, already back in the time of the Renaissance, that Judaism was starting to have more historical investigation on what actually happened and what we needed to do to fix the situation, this really didn't hit its stride until the later period of the Enlightenment. With the Enlightenment and the idea of freedom, everything in the world became, the Enlightenment started at the end of the 16th century, everything in the world became under a critical lens. Eventually religion did as well. People started questioning things. Science went to the front, rationalism went to the front. There was a renaissance in classical thought, which also was seen as the basis of philosophy. And the Enlightenment led to people questioning everything. Ultimately, this led to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the emancipation of the Jews in France. And Western Jews were now emancipated. And though there was still incredible anti-Semitism and a huge Jewish problem, nevertheless, many Jews left religion completely. And as I spoke about in a previous video, Shalach, which I'll make a link to at the end of this video, this happened too quickly. So many Jews threw off the yoke of Torah, of spirituality. There was no middle ground. There was no modern orthodoxy or anything like that. It was just the super ultra-religious of the Eastern Europe and the very modern and practically non-religious and easy to assimilate Western Jews of Germany and France. And these two didn't see eye to eye. And the anti-Semitism got worse and worse and worse. And the Zionists came along and said, listen, we have political power now, ability to maybe go back to the land. And in a way, the Zionists were able to see things more clearly because they didn't have the burden of the spiritualization, this mythological view of Eretz Yisrael. Everything about Eretz Yisrael, the spirituality, the level, the madrega, is totally true. But it got to the point where we didn't see it as a real place anymore. It became like a dream world. You can see this in stories of Rabbi Nachman. I'll make a little link here to where you can find that. It's in the book Tzaddik or Chaim Moran. Rabbi Nachman, you see ideas of this, though Rabbi Nachman physically went there. In the Baal Shem Tov, you see this. It's this idea that Israel is a spiritual level. And it's a utopia. And based on Gemaras such as Ketubos, 111, the 3 oaths, many Jews believed that we can't go back to the land. We have to wait. We have to be patient. And that the temple will fall from heaven and all these things will happen. But they were ignoring the very fact that there are many sources, right? Rishonim, Talmudic sources, many sources, which say that we can go back and we can have political power. So it's almost like these Jews who had shedded the idea of religion were the exact ones that needed to make this tikkun because everyone else was so stuck in the extremely beautiful and spiritual ideas of Chassidus and Kabbalah, of the spiritualization of Israel, that they weren't able to get in touch with the fact that Israel is a real place and we had a possibility of political power. And anti-Semitism was getting worse and worse and worse. Despite secular inroads into the Western community, anti-Semitism had now coming from a racial level as opposed to a Christian anti-Jewish level. So Herzl, Ahad Ha'am, all these different people, they made this Zionist movement. And again, back to the politics, because this all happened so quickly, and there were so many people just throwing off the yoke of Torah, there was such a breach, a divide between the ultra-Orthodox and the religious. I mean, there's such a divide between the ultra-Orthodox and the secular became the Zionists. And the ultra-Orthodox couldn't believe that redemption would come from these sinners. They couldn't believe it, so they held on very tightly to their opinions which have valid Torah sources, but wasn't really in touch with what was going on around them, nor was not understanding the Jewish people are a body, we're a whole unit, and not just the religious. Just like in the Holocaust, the religious were murdered with the secular, so too in the redemption, the religious and the secular have to work together. We have to work together for common causes for the community. But because of the bitter rivalries between the religious and the secular, and those rivalries influenced us, we weren't able to see eye to eye. That's why, thank God, people like Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook were able to see differently and be able to and he was able to bring the spirituality of Torah and the political power of Zionism together. He was a revolutionary which created the Datilu movement in Israel, which is fully religious, but also brings in aspects of modernity and Zionism serving the army. So back to our question of how Jews became weak. We were oppressed. We were thrown around. Jews became spiritual. We weren't allowed to join armies. We were middlemen, we were traders, we were businessmen. We weren't physical, and it became built up inside of us that physical power is not what we are. But yet we knew that we were chosen. So that chosenness had to come through spirituality, through the development of spirituality, of Torah, of Kabbalah, of Hasidus, the beautiful things that happened in diaspora. But it wasn't enough in the end, and we were severely blown out in the Holocaust and lost a third of our number. And some of this was the fact that we didn't have the foresight to get out in time. I'm not to blame the victims, because the Nazis and the Germans have to take responsibility for what they did. But over all these years, the Jews became weak. This isn't the way the Jews of the Torah, of the Tanakh, of Chanukah are. The diaspora Jew is weak. We don't see the fact that the physical strength of the body is the key to fixing the world. The spirituality of Torah needs a vessel to lie in. The Talmud itself says Torah learning makes you weak. We have to understand that Torah needs to be combined with physical might. And the spirituality of the prayer is totally necessary, but it must also be combined with the physical might and a total view and acceptance of the reality around us, that Israel is our home. It's where we're going back. And if we build it, they will come. Maimonides gives steps about how we build the land and how Messiah will come. The physical Beis Hamikdash will be built by our hands. I'd love if it fell from the sky from God, but if not, we can build it ourselves. God will join us. Just as God joins us with every mitzvah that we do, so too the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash, of returning to the land, God will join us in that. So this is how diaspora Jews became weak. Thousands of years of spirituality, of Torah, and without having the ability to become physical. And we don't see that in Israel. We see the Israeli Jews are tough. They're able to fight. They're like the Maccabees. This is how religious Jews were. The Maccabees were fighters. Everyone in the Torah and the Tanakh were fighters. Fighting and spirituality, physical body as well as the soul, go hand in hand. It is not natural. It is not normal. It is not practical to be just a person of soul and spirit. We live in a physical world, and the physical world tells us lessons. And the lessons are that in the diaspora, eventually, we are oppressed. We are destroyed. And we have a home, and God has granted us that home and has worked through the hands. The secular, the Zionists were the hands of redemption that are starting. And we can build it. If we build it, they will come. If we build it, God will come. That is the answer. Look at the story of the Maccabees. It's not just the story of the miracle of the lights. It's the story of the miracle of the war. And that is how Jews became weak, the story of Hanukkah, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture for today. My name is Adam Law. This is Wanderers with Adam Law. I hope things are well. Happy Hanukkah if you're watching this during Hanukkah. And please subscribe to this channel as well as my other channel, Wanderers with Adam Law. Again, I'm a registered psychotherapist, a board-certified chaplain. I'm here to help. Please reach out to me, and I will be glad to give you some of my time and my wisdom. Thank you so much. This is Adam Law. Be well.